And here we are. Hey.
Hey, hello,
Yeah,
hello everyone. We are now live. Welcome to An Honest Look. Welcome, Troy Hadeed, to our
Well,
yeah.
show. We're excited to have you on. It's been a long time planned.
Thank you.
So I
Yeah,
want to
thank you so much, Fatih. It's a pleasure to be here.
absolutely so nice to have you here. So I want to introduce you properly. Troy Hadeed is a yoga teacher, an author, and a social entrepreneur who's continuously excavating the human experience while aiming to make spirituality more accessible, discover what it truly means to embody love and aid humanity in realizing that we are far more connected than we have been led to believe. And so, what I would like to start by is, we love to get into the story of transformation, what leads people to do the work that they do, especially someone like yourself who's having an impact in the world and who's made it his mission to help others, right, find a deeper connection with themselves. So we'll get to that, but I want to hear a little bit about your book because I was browsing through a website, I was reading about it, and I got really curious. You want to share with us about it?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, Fatih, that it is called, at least it was called, Popcorn in My Pocket. But I've been in the editing, publishing process now for quite a while, and we may actually change the name of the book.
Okay.
But Popcorn in My Pocket to me is it's we have all these teachings and insights and ideologies that we talk about in society, and we read them and we repost them and we mention them and we write about them. But it seems to me that there's a little bit of disconnect in applying them to our lives
Mm.
and actually asking the question, how does this apply to my life? It's almost like, say, for instance, the teaching was love. We have this thing where we like to look at all the areas of our life where we live from a place of love, but what we fail to acknowledge is all the areas of our life where we don't. And that's where growth and transformation lies. So, this book, Popcorn in My Pocket, is where I share a lot of these teachings and reflections and ideologies, and then stories from my life and how they showed up, and how it allowed me to really understand this. And then I asked the reader to see how these teachings might apply to their life so that they can actually connect some of those dots.
interesting. Very
Yeah,
cool. I like the concept. I like actually I really do like the title. It's like I put it
yeah, yeah. And Popcorn, it's an amazing title. And what's funny, Rick, is I was 20 years old and I put my hand in my pocket and I found old popcorn and I put it in my mouth and I said the words "popcorn in my pocket." It's going to be the name of my first book. That was over 20 years ago,
Wow.
and I had no idea what that would mean or how that would come about.
Yeah.
And the analogy I use is popcorn is an analogy for all these spiritual teachings and insights. The pocket is a spiritual pocket, and every individual has their own spiritual pocket. And rather than have someone eat my popcorn, I want them to take my popcorn and put it into their pocket
Mm.
so they get their own understanding of it. That's where knowledge comes from, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I want rather than someone just repeating these teachings without really understanding how they show up in their lives.
Yeah. That that is that is such an important lesson. I know as coaches, like we talk we talk about our own experiences, um, but we want people to explore their world and see the world through their eyes, and and that's where the realization, the insights, the rising of consciousness happens.
Yeah,
It happens at their level. I can say all sorts of great stuff, but unless you go out and explore it for yourself, and I know previously we were just prior to this, you were talking about revisiting the carnival, the celebrations that were happening locally at your place,
Yeah.
and seeing that from a fresh and new experience. Um, that in itself is a lesson, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So can I track back a little bit? Can we just go back a little bit?
So,
Let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about what got you into what you do today, into yoga. Where are you coming from? What was your journey of transformation, your spiritual journey?
yeah.
Got you to want to write this book?
Well, I would have to answer that question, Fatih, by dropping a bit of a bomb and
Okay.
saying privilege.
Okay.
My privilege, I think, is what woke me up a little bit. You see, I come from, we have larger labels of privilege like race and skin color and gender and financial status and that kind of stuff. But then there's also privileges like safety and
Mm.
knowing what love is and always being supported and being part of community. And I think from a really young age, I recognized that I came from a certain aspect of privilege. And only in writing my book did I discover this. But when I was younger, reggae culture and Rastafarianism had a massive impact on my life. And I think what that did is expose me to a reality outside of my privilege.
Mm.
And with that, to me, came a responsibility. And that sense of responsibility meant that I had to do whatever I could to try to make a difference in the world, to try to serve something larger than myself. And I think, for many years growing up in my adolescence, I was ashamed of my privilege. I didn't want to tell people my name or where I grew up or where I lived. I didn't want to be seen as separate or other. But what I learned was that if you are ashamed of privilege, it doesn't serve anyone else but yourself. If you can own your privileges, then you can use that to serve larger collective, and it comes with a responsibility to do so. And I remember I was 10 years old, Fatih, and I wrote, remember when they had the Gulf War with Saddam Hussein?
Right. Yeah.
So I wrote a letter 10 years old to Saddam Hussein, President Bush, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and Mikhail Gorbachev at the time. At 10 years old, I wrote this letter, and it was published in a newspaper, and my mom actually sent it to all these governmental offices. And I always ask her, I always wonder, what at 10 years old drove me to do that?
Mm.
And the only thing I could put my finger on is that I acknowledge, even at a young age, that I had that responsibility to serve something larger than myself. And I would like to believe that ever since that realization, I've been trying to. I mean, we're human, we all make mistakes, but I've been trying to serve something larger.
So thank you so much for sharing that. That makes a lot of sense, right? Because we could spend years wallowing and feeling guilt towards what we have, right? When we see what others don't have, right? Instead of really using it like you're pointing to as a way to help others, a way to leverage what we do have to do good in the world. So I love
Yeah,
that you really brought this up. So
yeah.
what was it like growing up for you? What did
Um,
privilege look like?
Privilege looked like, I have to say, I mean, I didn't come from a family of extreme wealth, but we were always comfortable.
Hmm.
Because of the name I carry, Hadeed, it's generally comes with a stereotype of wealth. But I was always comfortable. I have to say that I never really wanted for anything. But my real privilege, Fatih, is security and love I experience from my family. And I think that is the greatest privilege of all, that safety. Because if someone doesn't feel safe, they're going to be far more resistant to step outside of the comfort zone, to follow their dreams, to take risks. Because if they fall, there's no one there to catch them.
Mm.
It's easy for me to say, just do it, just take a risk. But I have that net. I've always had that net. Even when my family thought I was an absolute lunatic, we don't always see eye to eye on our perspectives of the world. My family is in a lot of ways very conventional. And even when they couldn't understand my choices, there was still that support. Always that love and support. And I think that that feeling of being safe is really important and has a profound impact. You know, I even look at my circle of friends, and Trinidad is very much a drinking, numbing culture, party culture.
Not the
And
only,
from a, ah,
not the only one.
yeah, and from a really young age, I decided I wanted no part of it. So even up to now, at 43 years old, I have no idea what it's like to be intoxicated, other than through a third party and my friends around me. And you would think that there was a lot of pressure and peer pressure and that kind of stuff from my friends, and there wasn't. There was always that acceptance that allowed me to be who I was. And that too is safety and security in so many ways.
Privilege.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's like it's an interesting thing that you're pointing to, you know, the notion of, I mean, you can put it under the context of privilege, but this notion of safety, and this other thing of being allowed to acceptance, like the acceptance of your friends, to say, you know what, that's your choice, I accept you for who you are. Not many people have that in their sphere. um
Yeah.
there's a lot of brokenness, and you know, like we see it all, you know, just walk down the street, right? I'm curious, how can we envelop what you're talking about? How can we bring more privilege? I know you're on a mission, but how can we bring that privilege to a broader audience?
Well, I think it's really about looking at our relationships, like our relationships every day. It can be a family member, a friend, it can be a coworker, it can be just walking past someone in the street.
Mm.
But every interaction we have, no matter how small, you know, I believe that I try not to talk in mumbo jumbo terms. I like to be really tangible. But there is an exchange of energy that happens
Right.
no matter what. We are energetic beings. If I walk past someone in the street and my head is down and I don't smile, that has one sense of energy. If I walk past someone in the street and I lift my head and I look at them and I smile, that gives them a sense of belonging. And you know, there's, I'm sure you may have heard of Jane Goodall. She's an environmentalist.
Mm-hmm.
And she has this amazing quote. I mean, I'll quote it loosely, where she says, if we ask a question, can we change the world? That is actually a wrong question. We should not be asking that question. The question we should be asking is, how are we changing the world?
Ooh, yeah.
Because every word, every action, and every thought shifts energy around us. It impacts someone. You know, and I think if we bring more awareness to how we make people feel and the impact we have on people around us, there's no greater gift than to have someone feel loved and safe. That is the greatest thing I think we could offer anyone, or even to just have them be seen. You know, be seen. From my experience, Rick, you know, I think all over the world we have homeless people, and some of those homeless people may have drug addictions or whatever it is. And what I've found is that even if I can't, I don't feel it's in alignment to give someone money, if I just spend time with them and give them my attention for 2 minutes, that's even more valuable.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
you hear that so often um, in other conversations where people say, this is the first time I've actually somebody's ever listened to me.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Like
true.
somebody actually heard me
Yeah.
without judgment.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And
powerful.
I mean, but what
yeah,
you're pointing to, right? Like this feeling of being safe and having like, like feeling supported, right? You said I always had a safety net. That's at the very base of what most people that experience trauma, dysfunction, toxic relationships have missed in their childhood, right? It's what they didn't have, right? That when you refer to that as privilege, but it's something that a lot of people haven't experienced. So they, I think the important thing is to really realize that while that may have not been there for some of us growing up, that we can still recreate that through making those changes within ourselves, and like you were pointing to, just showing up in a different way in our interactions with others. Is he still there?
Did you freeze, Troy? Oh, looks like
hey,
Oh, there
there
he
we
I'm
is.
are.
back.
I
I
thought
don't know.
you went yoga on us. You kind of like
No, I don't know what just happened, but I decided to walk into another room just in case it was my connection.
Yeah, you were frozen.
Yeah.
That's okay. This is what happens live, right?
yeah,
We
Yeah. Yeah.
improvise.
yeah,
But what I was saying is what you're pointing to is that very safety net that a lot of people have not had growing up, right? That feeling like there's something there to support us if we fall, right? And it's
Yeah.
the very cause of dysfunction, toxicity in relationships. And what you're pointing to is like, well, you may have not had that, and in order to be able to show up differently in these relationships, what needs to be done is to create that within ourselves, right? Like to
Yeah.
work from the inside out to feel that way so that we can show up in that same way for others.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Where do you think is a good starting point in helping people create that, be able to show up in that way?
Yeah. I think on a very basic level, Fatih, we are generally always in a rush. We are always going somewhere else to do something else. And our attention is the most valuable thing we can offer anyone, like we mentioned just now. And I think just to create space and time to stop, to slow down and give people our attention is so fundamental. And then furthermore, we have this word conflict that we've thrown in for this podcast. And I think it's so important because if we really want to make someone feel safe and secure, we have to understand where they come from.
Right.
We have to understand their conditioning, which means we have to actually listen to them rather than project an assumption on who they are and what their conditioning may be.
Right.
And this story pops in my head is that again it comes down to privilege, but the privilege of having someone teach you right from wrong and having someone hold your hand and show you what love is and how you can do better to make you feel like you are part of a collective. That's not a privilege everyone has.
hmm,
And I remember driving on the road one day and I saw someone toss some garbage out the window into this lush forest. And at first I was outraged, like I often was back in the day when I was younger and all jazzed. Um, you get so passionate when you're younger. But then I realized a few things. I realized that where that individual had come from and the communities that individual had come from probably does not give much weight to littering or the environment for good reason, because they are probably struggling every day just to have their essential needs met, that they're just trying to get through the day. They've never felt supported by a system. Trinidad is a third world country. A lot of the communities in Trinidad have never felt supported, have never felt nurtured, have never felt cared for. So how could I expect him to care? And I think if we take a moment to really try to understand someone's conditioning, their circumstances, and what has made them who they are, that is the very first step to making someone feel seen and safe.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, we had a recent conversation, very similar, and it's when you let go of our concepts and judgments about what we are experiencing and become more curious. And like you said, they try to seek to understand more, you know, what is behind that action. We come from a more of a place of unconditional space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also say radical honesty with ourselves and recognizing that we too have conditioning, right? We too have a lens through which we're looking through, and it's
Yeah.
unique to ourselves, right? So it goes both ways.
Well, it
Yeah.
goes both ways, but like I know one of the things that I often reflect on when I catch myself. I don't catch myself all the time, but in a situation like that, where you see something like that and you have a reaction over somebody's actions, and you were alluding to understanding what's going on there. But I also ask myself the question: how am I contributing to that?
Yeah.
How am I showing up in the world that supports that? And that's a pretty big question. It's like, because when you're walking around, and you have a reaction to people that are homeless, and you rather than going, oh, they should get a job or do better, right? It's like, well, how am I contributing to that?
Yeah.
How am I actually supporting that? Right? It's like, oh God, like that opens up a bunch of different. Then you start to notice, oh yeah, I waste here, I do this.
Yeah. And you know what, Rick? I hear you say that. And it's also important to note, I think, that we have these conceptions of people.
Hmm.
And like you mentioned, we often have these judgments and these perceptions that we put onto people, these assumptions. And one of my favorite quotes is that privilege is blind to those who have it.
Hmm.
And it's easy to judge someone for where they're at or who they are, but unless it comes back to understanding where they come from.
Yeah.
And almost all of the time, if you create that space to really understand where someone has come from, all of that judgment and perception will fall away, because it will all make sense to you, and we would recognize that that individual was doing the absolute best with the cards they were dealt,
Hmm.
and that if we were in their shoes, chances are we would have done the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Like, you had this notion when you were 10 years old, and and looking at it from today's point of view, like what was the big transitional period that, like, was there any particular event or something that you just sort of said, you know what, this is the path I'm taking, like this is truly the path I'm taking? I'm assuming you were doing other things at 10 years old that weren't necessarily.
Yeah, yeah. I was actually pretty set on becoming the world's best soccer player
Oh,
at 10 years
excellent,
old.
excellent, good
Yeah.
for you.
Uh, and I think at 14, I went to England and I went to this soccer camp and I realized that I wasn't as good as I thought
Oh, I'm
I was.
sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. That was a transitional point in my life. But if I have to put my finger on anything, Rick, people always ask, how did you find yoga? How do you get
Right.
into yoga?
Mm,
And when I graduated university at 21, people would ask me, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, I'm going to teach yoga. They would be, well, do you do yoga? I was like, nope. And they were like, well, I was like, I didn't know I'm going to be a yoga teacher. I just
mm.
knew it, right? I didn't actually start practicing yoga postures until about 24, 25, 24 years old.
Wow.
But when somebody asks me how I found yoga, I always recall one story. And I remember when I was 14 years old and I was in high school, it was a boys' high school. I used to go up every lunchtime and I would sit with a teacher. I would give up my lunchtime to go and sit with a teacher called Mr. Hadeed. And he would give me all these books to read, all these texts to read. And they were all Eastern culture, Eastern spirituality texts.
Oh, wow.
And I always said that I wish one day I could see him again or talk to him again so I could tell him how he may have influenced my life at 14 years old. Well, so be it. A few years ago, I get this comment on my website that lands in my inbox. And it says, I think I gave you the practice of Brahmacharya to read in 1994, Fatima College, Hadeed. And I was like, no way. How is this even possible? So I replied to him and I got his number and I called him. And he says to me, he says, Troy, let me get your story straight. First off, he says, you were sent to detention. That's how you first came into my room at lunchtime. After that, you came every lunchtime of your own free will.
Oh,
And he said, I don't even teach yoga. I don't do yoga. I'm not Hindu. I have no association to yoga. He said, I gave you that book as a joke
oh no.
because because it was a text about sexual conduct and sexual misconduct.
Oh,
So he gave it to me as a 14-year-old boy as a joke.
Oh, wow.
And what's really beautiful is he said to me, he said, Troy, I've been talking about you for the last 20 years. He said, look at that synchronicity that you've been speaking about me and how I impacted your life. And I've been speaking about you and how you impacted my life. And we had absolutely no communication whatsoever. He said how he found me was that he now teaches in Ontario, Canada.
mm.
And he said that he was telling his kids in class about this kid, Troy Hadeed. And they Googled my name. And they said, do you know he's an international yoga teacher? And he said, what? So that's how he found me. And it's just such an amazing story of our synchronicity and the power of our choices and our actions when we don't even realize it.
Right.
No,
I
that
love
that
that.
is one powerful story.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yoga and how, yeah, yoga is, in my opinion, not in my opinion, is more of a philosophy and just, it's not just physical exercise, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I have always said, Fatih, that if I did not firmly believe that the practice of yoga increased someone's capacity to love one another and deepen their relationship to their understanding of God, I would walk away from it. I would want nothing to do with it. I personally have no desire to teach a physical practice.
Mm.
And the practice of yoga is so much more than that.
Mm.
And there are so many different dimensions, the practice of yoga, you know. It's come through such a rich lineage. And the scriptures, the text, there's all this stuff. There's different methods and approaches. But at the very core of the practice of yoga is realizing one's union, realizing our interconnectivity, our interconnectedness, right?
Right.
You know, yoga means to yoke or unite or
Mm.
join. And I don't know if you guys must have heard of a old spiritual teacher called Osho,
Hmm.
right? Well, I remember reading once in a book where Osho said that pretty much was saying that yoga is BS because you can't join what was never separate.
That's a
And
very good point.
yeah, yeah,
Very good point. Yes.
yeah. So of course he wasn't really saying yoga was BS, but he was bringing this slant on it that yoga is more of a realization of
Yes.
our union than our actual joining.
Yeah.
And to me, what the practice of yoga does, if practiced in an intimate, intentional way, is that it deepens our relationship to our mind and our breath. And that allows us to live our lives with far more intention and intimacy. You
Mm.
know, we in the traditions of yoga, there's this word namaste that in the West we love to throw around. And what that word means is that a God within me acknowledges a God within you.
Yeah.
That's not a surface acknowledgement. How different would we actually live our lives and conduct our relationships if we actually felt we were in relationship, even in conflict with God, with an element of God in physical form? So for me, yoga is, it does all of these things. You know, it gives us the ability to be present and to live our lives with far more intention, to acknowledge that we are shifting energy in the world and to actually see everything and everyone around us as an aspect of God, as an aspect of ourselves.
Yeah. And wow, goosebumps. Because it's man, the, the whole note, like we are global, like right, like we are the oneness.
Yeah,
And what, but and we're all unique, right? We're like it was described, like the individual waves, right? Like it looks like we're all individual waves, flighting around, but we're all part of that one ocean.
yeah,
Okay. And it's only that separation, that illusion of separation, right, built on through the, whatever you want to call it, ego or conditioning or whatever, that that holds us apart. And when
yeah,
we, and I think what you're saying is, like, when we see it for what it is and let go, we just naturally fall back into the ocean.
yeah. You know, and what's funny, Rick, is I always talk about this, what I call the identity crisis, the human identity crisis. And that identity crisis begins from the day we are born.
Mm.
I am told that my name is Troy and this is my body. This is who I am.
Yeah.
Same with Fati and Rick. So immediately we are fed a narrative that makes us separate and
Mm.
different. And then we, as we live our lives, we pull all these other things as part of our identity that make us separate, whether they be opinions or careers or belief systems or religions or race, all these things that make us separate. You know, what comes to mind for me is I was recently doing a corporate keynote and I was telling a story of last year I spent some time in absolute darkness, in absolute solitary darkness. So I was telling that story. And afterwards, a lady came up to speak to me. And she explained to me that her son is 8 years old and he was born blind.
Mm.
And she started to explain the psychology of a child that is born blind. And she says that at 8 years old, he still doesn't understand the pronoun I.
Mm. Very interesting.
And, I was telling his story to someone recently, and they said, well, hopefully when he grows up, he'll get it. I was like, no, hopefully we'll get it.
Oh,
He
wow.
already gets it,
Yeah.
And it just echoes the very same sentiment.
I know we were sharing again about grandchildren, or children, right? And what I enjoy so much in just observing them, not even just involved with them, but just observing how they're free of concepts, they're free of judgments, they're free of limitations. They're exploring constantly some things that are fresh and new, and unbound, you know. Um, and then they become adults, and then I get to experience them as adults, and it's like,
Yeah,
where did you pick that up?
yeah,
It's so innocent. It's so innocent.
yeah,
They really witness a reaction to it oftentimes, as they're in that exploration and like they don't have the limitations that we have. The adults around them tend to not have that same level of patience or the expectations that they'll pay attention, or like, you're not listening to me and what are you doing that for, right? So we, without really meaning, truthfully, condition them to really step into that other, state of being that we are in as adults, right? Where we feel the weight of life, where we feel like the urgency of things, and where we don't have that presence that they have, right? Where we find ourselves impatient with their presence, right? So really, without meaning to, we start wiring them to make that not okay. And that's really sad.
yeah,
I think unintentionally we all do that as parents. I know that I have done that, right? Because I'm driven by all the thinking that drives my life, the responsibilities and the things that I need to tend to. And so by not being present with myself, I can't really even like recognize that they're in a moment where they're being present, right? I get like annoyed, right? And I'm moving quick enough. And of course, part of that is necessary, right? You're trying to get your kids out the door onto the school bus. You can't just sit there and be present, right? but we do that, outside of when it's an absolute necessity as well.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It's too funny.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. I can't say I have the honor of having kids or grandkids, but maybe one day.
And yeah, I mean,
Maybe one.
they're your greatest teachers. Like, do you want self-development on steroids?
Yeah,
Become a parent, because it will literally, like, you will have to question everything about everything, like
yeah,
completely shifts everything.
yeah. So much. I look at so much of my friends who are parents, and I have it's so beautiful to see my friends be parents, but at the same time to see how they have to step up and what they have to give up. Um, it's really phenomenal. I think we don't always recognize what it takes.
Right, as a society, we don't have it very high up in our values. I can tell
Yeah,
you, in the United States, especially the role of mothers, it's just not valued in the way
yeah,
that it should be, right?
yeah,
We are the ones that are creating the next generation of human beings, and human beings are what this life is all about. Right? And
yeah,
there's zero value being put on that. It's actually like looked down upon oftentimes. It's conditioning. It's conditioning.
yeah,
It's all conditioning. We've been
yeah,
conditioned to not put any value onto it.
This is what kind of like this is a little bit of a sidebar conversation, but I'm curious on your take on this too, because COVID gave us a huge opportunity to slow down,
Right.
to literally stop and reevaluate what was really important for us to keep moving. Obviously, there's
Yeah.
an economy and various other things that, you know, feeding the nation and stuff like that needs to take place. But the slowing down, the conscious slowing down, created something really positive.
Yeah.
And I thought, I was so hopeful that we would, and carry on some of that, at least a lot of that. Not but it seems like we're starting to drift back into the speed, right? We're getting way ahead of ourselves instead of flowing with life, which I think yoga teaches more of a flowing with life, as opposed to, getting ahead of the current
Yeah. Yeah.
and then fighting your way around. um, I'm curious on your take on all that. Like, like, we've had the experience. This is
Yeah.
what's possible, and yet we seem to be throwing it away again. I'm not, maybe it's
Yeah.
just,
I think I agree with you 100%, Rick. I think we talk about this new normal, but it's not a new normal. It's a normal. We're going back to the exact same patterns, and I think that the pandemic, in a lot of ways, was a wake up call. And if we don't wake up, there will be something else.
mm,
I think it was meant to shake us, and it did.
yeah,
But the question is, have we learned? Have we learned? Have we evolved? And I think some people have.
I
I
agree.
think some people have reassessed their values and their lives, and now live a little bit differently. I don't think the system as a whole has taken on the lessons that it should have.
no,
What I can tell you, for me in the pandemic, now I live on north coast of Trinidad in the forest. So on a normal daily basis, if I scream, nobody can hear me. So that what the pandemic did for me is took my isolation hundredfold, because I would come into town every day in my yoga studio, in my society, in my community. That would be my social interaction. But there was now no social interaction, and I was out in the forest alone for long periods of time.
mm,
And what I want to put my finger on here, Rick, like I'm sure a lot of people have similar experiences, is that the human interaction is far more valuable than we would ever imagine.
mm,
I don't know how to describe it, but it's almost like there's a magnetic, electromagnetic exchange between two people in the absolute simplest of interaction.
Right.
And I remember, very often when I'm home alone all day, and I might get kind of down or quiet or introverted, I would drive into town just to buy something foolish over a counter and have that one interaction with a
Mm-hmm.
human being.
wow,
And I could feel that exchange. And that exchange, just making someone smile, that exchange would I could feel it in me. It would change my state of mind completely. And I think that the pandemic has that also to teach us that human relationships and human interaction are far more fundamental and essential that we would have ever thought.
I
yeah,
love that. Useful.
I like that. That's
We are social beings, right? We
Yeah,
are here to interact, and we need that sense of belonging, right? That exchange, like you're describing. I can completely relate to that. For me, was I was never alone. I had my two kids, where it was the three of us. And I
yeah,
remember taking him down, we live by the water on the pier. Like, I would see another adult and I would get really excited, like walking their dog from afar, and it would make me feel like I wasn't alone. It would make me feel like, oh, there's still life outside of here, because it really, really, like at some point New York City emptied out, and it felt like we're the only people here.
Yeah.
It was crazy to actually feel like that in this concrete jungle in New York
Yeah.
City. Like, who knew that you could feel that way in the midst of one of the most densely populated cities in the world?
Yeah.
But it felt that way. It really felt isolating. So
Yeah.
that it really resonates with me. And I also wanted to say, pointed to going back to whether or not COVID did it have a lasting impact? I would say, and I find myself to be very optimistic in this sense. I think it did. And yes, you're pointing to the fact that the systems may have not changed, and the resistance of wanting to go back to the familiar and what we know and the way things were, and perhaps the way that we're able to control populations, that has really kicked in. I really noticed that. But I would say that underground, something different is brewing. Underground, there are people that have really shifted and changed. And we may not see that change as obviously right now. We may not see it anytime soon, but I think it has set something in motion. Maybe it's not every single individual, and maybe some people even came out of it in a worse place than they were before. But there is something in motion that wasn't there before. So
Yeah.
I like to keep like just stay curious and just see what will happen in a few years from now, because we have that impatience of like, didn't you learn that lesson? Why aren't you different yet? You know what, for some people it takes a lot longer to make that shift, and for
Yeah.
changes to show up on a social level, I think it's going to take, we're up against years and years, centuries of conditioning, right?
Yeah. I agree, Fatih.
It's going to take some
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Patience.
Be a generation. It could be a
Yeah,
generation.
to
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
generation. I think we are in the middle of a paradigm shift, just because of even also all the things that we have judged, as I personally would put myself, Gen X, in the middle of that technology and all the things, social media, that we really heavily judged because it was so foreign to our upbringing. Those very things are actually allowing this new generation to be more connected, to be more in the know, to have more tools, to have a voice, right? Which we didn't have. So, what is going to unfold in the future is very much something that we, in this generation that I was raised in, we can't quite predict, because it's not our, like our familiar. It's not what we knew. So, I am
Yeah.
actually very hopeful in this sense. Very hopeful.
Yeah. Good. I like that. I am too, Fatih. I'm taking your perspective on it.
Amazing. So, as we're coming to a close, I wonder if there's anything else you would like to add, anything that we didn't ask you that you would like to speak to. Um, was there anything that you wanted to conclude with?
Well, I would just say, we have this amazing theme for our time together, conflict to connection, from conflict to connection. And I would just invite people to, in their relationships, whenever they feel this conflict or this resistance, or they feel like they are in conflict, like we mentioned so many times today, just to understand someone's conditioning, just to understand what has shaped them, what has created them, what has made them who they are, and that they are doing their best. That there is an element of God, there is a soul inside that being that is doing its very best with the cards that it's been dealt. And there is an amazing quote that was so powerful for me. I had to put it on my arm in ink, but I wish I had found it 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And it says this, it says, I have not come to teach, I have come to love, and love will teach. And I think that so many times we're trying to teach people, we're trying to make them wrong, we're trying to prove that we are right.
Hmm.
And sometimes the best way to facilitate someone's growth and transformation is just to love them. And love might not always be flowers and rainbows. Love isn't always bunnies and bears. Sometimes love is uncomfortable, love is fierce, and love is walking away. Sometimes love is courageous. But it's just to acknowledge that rather than teach someone, if we can find a way to love them, then we can let that love teach them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's it. That's it, isn't it? Isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
That's it. You know, when
Yeah,
we remove everything, that's all that's left.
yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
You know it.
Mic drop.
Yeah,
I know. It's like I can't say anything more.
There's nothing to add, right? It's like the ultimate truth.
yeah.
Thank you for that beautiful message. Where should people reach out to you? What's the best ways? Your website, best ways?
Yeah, best ways would be my website, troyhadeed.com, or my Instagram platform. It's where I'm most active. And I would encourage people to sign up for my newsletter and stay posted on book news to come, because it is coming and it's going to be exciting. And if anyone would like, I do work one-on-one, and if anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out. I am available, and I will make myself available.
Excellent. You have a fabulous website, and you're right about your activity on Instagram. It's I love how you blend the quotes and the photos and things like that. It's very cool. Very
Yeah,
cool.
thank you.
Yeah.
So I put in the
Very powerful man, my friend.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So I put all your links in the chat. If anyone wants to reach out to you, there's also going to be in the show captions, as well as show notes of the podcast that will be out in a couple of days. So
Yeah.
Rick, where should we say?
Beautiful.
Go ahead.
Me? Hey, if you really enjoyed this show, and I certainly have, make sure that you do subscribe to the channel and follow us on. We have an Instagram account too, but follow us on Spotify and all the other platforms for our podcast. We love subscribers. We also want comments. If you really like the show and if you want to reach out to Troy or ourselves, please make a comment in wherever you can put comments, and or even questions. We're all very approachable. I know from a yoga point, I had so many misconceptions about what yoga was. All I saw was the downward dog and getting put into a pretzel and all this. It's like, how is this helpful? Kind of a thing. So it's like, I really appreciate understanding it more, and thank you again, Troy, for a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Love.